a full-time year.
Right. If you do the 40 hours a week times 50 weeks. Yeah.
Right. And if you are seeing clients for 40 hours a week, you have just lost your mind.
Yeah, certainly at that stage of your career. Yes, for sure.
At almost any stage.
Yeah.
30 hours is really considered a pretty high level therapeutic load in my experience.
Mm-hmm.
I've done more and I've regretted it.
Yeah.
So it takes about 3 years to do that. And in that time, you have two supervisors. You have a primary supervisor, and that's the person whose license you are using, which means that the supervisor has to really trust their interns because they're practicing under their license.
Right. And we can analogize this to medical doctors who graduate medical school, and they're called doctor, and they have all the rights and privileges thereto pertaining. But what they are usually in at that point is a residency, and they're practicing under someone else's license. So they're a doctor, but they're still supervised as a resident doctor. You don't call them anything different. For our profession, we call them interns for some reason. Some states call them associates, which I think is a little more appropriate because intern sounds academic. It sounds like you're still in school, and it begets a lot of suspicion from the clientele base. But you are licensed. You're just licensed under someone else's supervision.
Right. And so you have to have acquired the basic educational parameters and completed the application process to get your internship license.
Right.
So you have that basic level of license. And then the one you're practicing under, the legal license that you're practicing under, is your supervisor's license. So now you have on your side, like I walk into the intern's office because interns are cheaper to see. They just are, because we're trying to get our experience.
Yep.
And you get a much greater breadth of experience if you don't have to charge as much.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
So, but when you walk into your intern's office, you get your intern's experience, their 3 years of school, plus however many years they've been in their internship, plus the 3+ years of experience of the supervisor, plus that supervisor's internship and their supervisor's experience. So you've got a lot of experience in the room.
Yeah.
When you sit down, even with an intern.
Yeah, I often say, so at our agency at Zephyr Wellness, we host graduate students who are going through those practicum hours that are required before you get your degree. And people don't really hesitate too much anymore these days, but the ones who do, we've trained our office staff well enough now, and I experienced this too when I was running the phones, that when they hesitate or they balk at, oh, a student or, oh, an intern, what's that mean? We give them that same spiel that you just gave, which is they're surrounded by some really good advice, and they don't get to go too far off the leash, and that actually really reassures people because they go, oh, so instead of seeing a sole practitioner perhaps who doesn't consult at all, because some of them don't, I get this person who's more or less compelled to consult multiple times a week on my case and the other cases that they have. And typically those caseloads are a little lower when you're an intern because you want to be growing and developing as an intern or as a student and not simply churning out hours and making money. Because if you're doing that, if you are rocking the 30 to 35 hours a week as an intern, it doesn't leave a whole lot of room for personal growth and exploration.
And consultation.
Yeah.
And honestly, that's one of the reasons I like agency work, is because if I am having a particularly difficult case, I can duck out into the hallway, grab my free compatriot,
right,
pull him into my room and say, I'm having a problem and I need to talk this over with somebody. And I find therapists who do that are better therapists.
Yep. And I would add on to that what you introduced me to, because I've had it both ways. I've had individual supervision where you're just one-on-one with your supervisor, and group supervision. Group supervision is not a classroom setting. It shouldn't be a classroom setting, at least, where the supervisor is the all-knowing disseminator of information into the empty waiting vessels. it should be collaborative, because in any given group setting, you're going to have a variety of people who have their own life experiences and insights and intelligences. And if you don't tap into those, you're not going to have a very robust experience in that group setting. So now let's take a group supervision. An intern presents a case, and the members of the group all weigh in. Typically, you're going to have a variety of methodologies and modalities and theories and perspectives. So we'll take, for example, and this is going to sound like lingo, but if I present a case and I'm a William Glasser oriented person with choice theory and reality therapy as my modality, there might be a cognitive behavioral therapist and a solution focused brief therapist and a Jungian analytic psychological oriented person, all giving different perspectives on the case that I'm presenting. That's a really fruitful, well-fertilized conversation, right? And I should walk out of there with a whole bunch more knowledge that I can apply to my case. So what you showed us in that group setting is that, and you fostered this with the cross consultation and crosstalk that we had, that we all grew exponentially more because of the benefit of having the other interns around us and not just one unilateral supervisor telling us what to do through her perspective. So to your point about the agency work, if you're getting treatment in an agency setting, chances are your case is going to get more attention in the hallway and at the break table and all that stuff. Not because we're gossipy people. In fact, we're specifically admonished not to do that, but because we care so deeply about providing good treatment, and we have the access to our fellow clinicians, that you end up getting more eyeballs on your presentation than you would otherwise have in a private practice setting.
Which is very helpful, I find. As a therapist, I find it very helpful. Mm-hmm. As a client, I think it's also very helpful. I think that's really a good thing. My son and his wife, for lack of a better term, and his daughter, her stepdaughter, are in therapy together. And the daughter presented with some interesting play that looked significant to the therapist and to my son and his wife. And they chose at that time to put her in with a play therapist in the session. So they talked it over and made an appointment for the child before they left. So if they weren't working with an agency, they wouldn't have been able to do that.
That's true too. Yeah, it's easier to find somebody under one roof with multiple practitioners than it is thumbing through the yellow pages. Hopefully you're not thumbing through the yellow pages. If you know somebody in the community, they can make a strong recommendation for a good fit. But I want to go back to there's two directions I want to go there. One is about our profession, marketing itself, and how we should all interact. But the other is about family systems work, or systems work in general. So earlier in the conversation, I think you were talking about how in the course of treatment, when we speak something in front of our significant others, they will hear it differently, right? And we have the opportunity to clarify communication and all sorts of things. So that may not necessarily beget couples work. And I'm curious your opinion, because I know mine, but I don't want to share it. I want to hear yours about treating someone quote unquote individually. Say they have a quote unquote individual problem, like say with alcohol consumption, and bringing in the significant other. If they're married, if they're not, then that's a different story. But if they're married, do you advocate treating that person individually, so it goes, or do you just bring in the other party so they can hear what goes on? Maybe they're not even participating, but it seems to have an advantage. Would you advocate for that systemically?
Systemically, I always like to treat the whole system. I think there are some things that are better treated outside of the system, but you can't know that until you had eyes on the whole system.
Fair point.
And in terms of alcohol and drug abuse, this is a hot topic. I mean, it's been a hot topic as long as I've been working with this. You have to deal with the addicted person. and their addiction. And that should be the focus of the whole thing if you're an alcohol and drug counselor. My feeling is that addiction in a system is a symptom and not the focus. And when you make it the focus, you're not looking for the problem anymore.
Couldn't agree more.
I think that in my experience, when a couple is having problems with alcohol and drug abuse, infidelity, any number of things, once you pull the system in and start looking at the system, now everybody's looking at the system instead of at the problem person. Then you start looking at, why is one of you feeling like they need to act out in whatever way that is? Now, that may be a reflection of their own childhood, and they're now playing it out in their current relationship. It may be a physical predisposition to addiction. Lots of people have them. It could be any number of things. And some of it's just that miscommunication again. I find often that we have people who say, I want a monogamous relationship. Often. I expect to have a monogamous relationship. That's my expectation. And yet they repeatedly have their partner go out and have affairs. And then they accept them back, forgiving forgiving that behavior without ever renegotiating their contract. Their expectation is still that they're going to have a monogamous relationship, right? I don't know how much couples therapy you've been doing since I've not been.
Quite a bit. Yeah. No, you're right. I'm just nodding in like, sorry, if my eyebrows are furrowed, it's to indicate that I'm paying close attention to what you're saying. And I agree.
So in my experience, you have to renegotiate that contract, because that's what marriage is. It's a contract. And it's a contract on so many levels. We act like marriage is this marvelous thing where we meet the person that we fall in love with and we decide we're going to spend the rest of our life with them, and we don't talk about any of the little business type things. But you really have to talk about all the business.
Right. That's
and
hard.
It is hard. And once you start having problems in your relationship, you really have to talk about the business.
In my view, because I do this emotional functioning thing that I learned from your friend and mine, Chuck Holt, it's a matter of intimacy to explore the issues. And intimacy is begat by vulnerability. And most people don't want to go into vulnerability because it comes with an implied risk. And risk of what? Pain. You get hurt if you're vulnerable. So as a consequence, we don't get intimate with each other. We stay surfacey, and we pretend we're living in the romanticized movie version of whatever relationship is, and we don't have to do the hard work. So when I say it's hard or it's scary, what I mean is people typically don't want to embrace the vulnerability that's required to solve the problem that then yields bliss, right? So we're okay with some sort of contentment or some sort of thrill, but we don't ever achieve bliss because we've obstructed ourselves from being vulnerable enough to say, I might have some faults. It's easier for me to point out your faults and make you fix them, right? So how do we as clinicians help invite people into that vulnerability, knowing that there's a reasonable expectation of success on the other side, that life could be so much better, your marriage could be so much healthier, your relationship with your child could be so much better if you would just get out of your own way, right? And invite in this feedback.
Well, and I try not to say that to them, because getting out of your own way is not ever a good way of moving people along. My experience is that I start off with, okay, you're in marriage counseling because it's not working. So doing what you're doing isn't working. So worst case, at the other end of therapy, we're going to have a better divorce. because we will have talked out the issues